right, folks. Well, welcome to our basic neurophysiology workshop. I hope you're all looking forward to it. Mirjam told me, by the way, not to tell jokes. So now I feel that the dare.
I did not. I only tell you to not tell one joke, and that's the radio face joke. Because you've
Oh, you
made
mean
that
that I have a face for
57
radio?
times already, yeah.
But we have new people. They don't know yet. So, although I think Andrew mentioned, all they have to do is look at you and they know you have a face for radio. So can't win them all. Anyway, we are very much looking forward to kicking off our session on complex learning. And so welcome. But I think, and this is my fault, not Mirjam or Paul's fault, but I think we did a very poor job in letting you know that you should have gone through the first module or two of the asynchronous part of this course. So this course is actually different than some of the other courses where it's either all asynchronous or all live online. This course is truly a blended program. And so I thought before we kick off, we just show you what we would like you to have done prior, and we're going to catch you up and make sure that you have the opportunity to go back before our second live session. Let me just share my screen and we'll let Sarah in too. So where is the Safari? Here we go. So obviously you've all been able to get into the conference platform. So the conference platform will lead you to this homepage. And if you haven't already done so, you just click on Mirjam and Paul's name. That's the part that'll usually show up. And you'll see here a click here to access the asynchronous parts of the course. And if you haven't seen that or you haven't been there, we'd love for you to be able to go. When you click on it, if you haven't accessed any of our asynchronous courses, you'll be asked to create an account. It's a one-time deal. You only have to do it once. And then when you do, you will end up here. In fact, you'll see a list of all the courses that you have access to. So through the conference, there's probably 4 or 5 courses that you'll have access to, and they will show up the minute you click on that link. So encircle any of the courses. If you see a link that says go to the asynchronous part, click on that, it'll show up, and there's a whole bunch of more stuff for you. So our course is designing, implementing complex learning initiatives in organizations. So when you click on it, you will enter into a program that looks like this. And if you just click on the welcome button here, you'll see that there's 5 sections just as an introduction to the course. We have a welcome video, which Andrew's already commented on. We also have a breakdown of how this program throughout the 6 weeks is laid out. And so this can walk you through how everything is set up, the different dates for the live classes and so forth. We also have a bit more of what you can expect. So, and we're going to actually walk you through some of that now. And here's a video of Mirjam and Paul having a conversation on how people learn. So a little bit of the basics on how people learn. And then just an article, or it's actually a chapter from Paul's book on zooming in and zooming out when it comes to how we explore different aspects in learning and so forth. And then our next module, which is what we're going to talk about today, is stakeholder management and intake. And so we just have a couple things where we want you to think about what is stakeholder management and so forth. So we got a whole bunch of stuff in here. It's okay if you didn't go into it. Don't worry about any of it. But we wanted to make sure you knew about it.
Well, also, Matt, sorry, can I just jump in? Because I think it's totally okay if you haven't gone into it now. I just want to kind of point out, like, when we move forward, it will be very hard for you to get value out of the live sessions if you haven't gone through the asynchronous bits, because we're really going to ask you to bring your own like case studies and kind of prepare for these live sessions, because they are more to discuss the reality later on. So I mean, if you want to be a fly on the wall, you're welcome. However, if we only end up with flies on the wall, then it becomes very hard to get value out of the session.
So, and it's a great way for you to also put comments and ask questions. You can always ask questions on the conference page, but if you ask them in the course page here on Blinkit, it notifies us, and it notifies all of you if you're already in there, and you'll be able to have different conversations based on where we are in the program. So there's that. Any questions about that? All right. So now I wanted to just share with you what we're doing. So here we are. Let me share sound. Okay. So today we wanted to just spend, I know we only have about an hour, but we wanted to review what we've been talking about, give you a quick program overview. And again, there's a more in-depth version of that in the Blinkit program. But really what we're going to dive into today in our next live session is stakeholder management at the very beginning. How do we do scoping and intake? How do we start exploring, making sure we actually have a learning problem versus we have some other organizational development problem or even a problem at all? And then we're going to introduce you to the case. We're going to work with a client, stakeholder, who's an executive in our fake company named Charles-Louis. And your job is going to be to diagnose what the actual problem is and facilitate different conversations with Charles-Louis to actually scope out what the issues are and make sure that you don't go down a path that's going to take you toward a point of least effectiveness. And then we are going to ask you to do some homework to prepare for the next live session, and also to start looking at different ways in which you can bring this back into your own workflow. So we'll give you some homework around that. So that's our agenda for today. It's a lot, but we'll do our best to work through it. So this, if you've been into the Blinkit, you're probably familiar with this graphic, but Mirjam and I have been envisioning complex learning initiatives, not just complex learning, but the initiative itself as having three major components. The first is that there's an experience that all learners go through. And so it can be a positive experience, it can be a negative experience, but that experience influences motivationally how willing participants are to continue and engage. It also can affect the politics of whether you get the investment from stakeholders or you're able to continue your programming throughout subsequent years as you go through different budgeting endeavors, as Serena can talk to for you as well. There's also the learning design process. So how do we actually do an instructional design? And if we're looking at complex learning, we're probably looking at complex skills. And that in of itself is a lot more complex. It's a complex skill in of itself as we start to look at the instructional design methodology. So how do we overlay that along with thinking about experience? And we really should differentiate those two things. Learner experience does not equate to learning. It just is a different way in which the participants will go through that process. And then finally, of course, there's logistics, right? So we have to deal with the fact that there's going to be a certain budget to this. There's going to be times when we're required to either implement a program, or we might be told that we can't do something in the most expedient way. Maybe we have to do it as an online program, or we have to do it while people are all together. So there are often logistics that affect the decisions we have to make. And then throughout all three of these silos, as we try and integrate them together, We have to think about the different politics organizationally that we're dealing with. Everyone we're dealing with, from a stakeholder, end user, influencer, subject matter expert, they all have different agendas, different needs. There are politics we have to massage as we go through that. And so this program is all about how do we integrate all four of these dynamics cohesively into something that's going to yield an impact that we can ultimately measure. And if we take a fairly generic design approach to this, we need to think about stakeholder management throughout each phase of our design and our development. And of course, I know we can't blame Will for good evaluation, but to steal from our friend Will, evaluation should be occurring at all phases of our process. So how do we overlay stakeholder management, keep in mind that we need to evaluate and so forth as we go through. Now, quick caveat, Mirjam, Paul, and I aren't going to spend a lot of time on evaluation. If you're interested in evaluation, we recommend you go deeply into the program with Will, which started last week. But you can still catch up. So you can easily watch his video. And of course, we can set up any office hours with you for him if you want. So this program, we're going to step you through each phase here, but consider the three-dimensional aspect of how you manage the politics, the expectations of your stakeholders, and so forth. And so right now, in weeks 1 and 2, and we're entering week 2 now, you're going to be asked to look at the scoping, the intake of the learning initiative. Do we have a problem? Do we understand what the problem is? Are we just taking an order, or are we truly trying to diagnose what the issues are at stake and make sure we meet the need, not necessarily the request? Next week, we'll dig into actually doing a needs analysis. So once we understand what the problem is, how do we explore what the skills needs are? What are the gaps? What do we have to close as we come up with some kind of a solution? Week 4, we'll get into the design of complex learning. And so we'll really dive into what are the mechanics of learning and how do we design for that? What kinds of content and activities and methodologies do we put into this? Week 5, we're going to really look at the execution. So how do we actually start implementing all of this? And of course, you can't design in a vacuum. You can't develop absent design. You can't implement. These are in many ways concurrently happening. So how do we work through all of these in a more complex way for ourselves? And then week 6, Paul will join us live and we'll give you a chance to do some Q&A with Paul, but we're also going to ask you to put this into practice. And you may not be able to finish this, obviously, because it can take longer than 6 weeks, but we want to get you kick-started toward your own complex learning initiative. And so we'll provide you the support on how to go through that. And so that's the program outline. Thoughts, questions, reactions? Anyone want their money back yet? Good, because we don't have it. We already spent it. So, all right. Do you mind if we take a second and ask you a question? What do we mean by stakeholder management? Who is our stakeholder? What is a stakeholder?
So maybe I'll just quickly jump in here. I think that there's several different stakeholders when you are looking at a complex learning initiative as well, right? You've got your learners, you've got the business that comes up with a request and a need. Then you have, as you mentioned earlier, it could be subject matter experts that are actually the ones that bring the content forward. And there's also all of these stakeholders in between. Depending on across how many functions, is it across geographical areas, who are the leaders of the people that are going through the learning initiative as well. So I think it's important to look at stakeholders much more broadly. And one of the things that that I at least try to do is in the beginning make a stakeholder map. Who does this touch upon? Who actually has which need that they're trying to get out of this, and does it actually match up with some of the things that we're trying to put forward or that we're trying to achieve as well?
That's brilliant, Peter. And I guess my next question is, can I have more than one stakeholder?
Matt, there's already some really good answers in the chat. So we have C-suite, learners, teachers, and then Ken sums it up really nicely. Anyone with some form of vested interest in a learning initiative. So I guess they have already answered that question as in yes. Sorry, Serena, I don't understand. So yes, I think they've already answered that there are multiple stakeholders.
Yeah. And what do we do if we have conflicting stakeholders? For example, what does a CFO care about versus the CEO? If the CEO calls and tells you, I want leadership development, and the CFO calls and tells you, yep, we want leadership development. Do you have different needs that have to be addressed for both of them? Do CFOs think the same way as CEOs? Is this thing on? The quick answer, no.
No.
No, what do CFOs care about?
Money.
Well, going deeper, we all care about money, but a CFO, they care about liquidity. They care about where the cash is coming from. They will care about raising cash, raising equity. They care about cost management. Depending on whether they're a more senior CFO versus for a smaller company, they might be more interested in the filing and behaving more like a controller versus how to raise that cash. So depending on who they are, they're going to have different care abouts than the CEO. What does the CEO care about? What do CEOs tend to care about?
I would say they would care more about the outcome. Like, are we seeing the improvement, or are people happy? Sometimes that may also just be like what they also might care about. Like, are people not complaining to me anymore?
Well, that is absolutely part of it. CEOs often care about how they're going out and getting the word about the company promoted, right? So they're thinking about board relationships. They might think about, if you're in the US, it's Wall Street, or depending on what country you're in, how it's publicly traded. They might care about regulatory relationships. They might care about client dynamics. So they have a different set of care abouts. So you constantly are having to ask, who's my stakeholder for this? And what are those care abouts? By the way, we're going to give you a chart today on what some generic care abouts are, depending on what level your stakeholder might be in the organization and what their functional role might be. And we'll share that with you momentarily. Right? What are some other stakeholders? We've talked about, you listed some of them, but get specific for me. Who are some of the other types of stakeholders you might run into? Who's picking up the phone and calling you? Supervisors. Yeah, we'll get a lot of that, right? Supervisors are calling up, I have a team and you need to come and do team building workshops for me, right? Anyone get that one? I do. Right? Anyone get, I need you to teach my people how to do goal setting. Right? So we'll definitely get that kind of stuff, right? Human resources. Marcia says human resources, right? What are human resource people? And are they people? Are human resources people? I don't know. I kind of find that scary, devilly. So what does human resources tend to call you for? again, feel free to hop on your mic.
Lots of times it seems like that's related to the compliance or things that folks have to do. How can we make sure that they're set up, and how can we make sure that they've completed this so we can say, you know, our staff is, you know, certified or have completed, you know, requirement on actually like managing, or like they know our like non-retaliatory policy or anything of the like, kind of what I see for HR.
Yeah, so we can get often HR coming in with different types of things around compliance or regulatory, or you'll get stuff like sexual harassment, or you'll get other types of stuff that they're being held accountable for.
Marcia also calls out leadership, development, talent, and performance, which is also my experience.
Yeah. How many of you get the leadership? We need you to run a leadership workshop. I hate that. Well, one workshop is going to solve all problems of leadership. Right?
I also think, like, just calling this out, you know, it's a bit harsh maybe, but I think human resources is also quite guilty of asking for things that don't have a clear problem. Like, oh, we need people to become more effective as a team. Okay, so have we spotted that there's a problem with that? What exactly is the problem? Nobody knows. Somebody has just read a book or something on team effectiveness. And yeah, I think they often have the request that you're like, okay, is this the solution that we need to find a problem for? But I might be cynical here. I don't know.
I just had a chief commercial officer, so that basically the head of sales, called me up and he said, hey, I was on a plane and I just read the latest issue of HBR. And I just learned everything there is to know about how teams work. So can you run a workshop on that for me? And that was what he wanted, a workshop based on an HBR article. And so Scott asking for things that may not require training. We get that a lot as well. And so there's a whole bunch of issues that arise. And what I'd like to do, what Mirjam and I would like to share with you, is 4 question categories that are just the beginning for every stakeholder you encounter. So, and we're going to give you the slides, and I also have both a video and a handout that goes in more depth that we'll put into Blinkit at the end of today for you, that goes into depth on this. So you don't have to take notes on any of this if you don't want to. But can someone give me an example of a request that you might get? Give me a scenario, something you might receive a call for. Someone who's willing to role play with me to make it more attractive for you to actually volunteer.
Come on.
Critical thinking.
Critical thinking. Who said that? Was that you, Andrew?
Yeah.
Okay, critical thinking. You got to be a tough one. Okay. All right. So let's assume Andrew is a mid-level manager and he calls me up and he says, I'd like you to run a workshop on critical thinking. I would like you to think about these 4 questions as actually categories of questions, because depending on the complexity of the topic, I might ask a whole bunch of follow-up questions around it. The first category of question, though, is focused on the outcome. So, Andrew, when we think about critical thinking, when you call me up and you ask me to do a critical thinking program, what is it you'd like to see happen? What is the outcome you're looking for? What do you want to have happen that's different from today? Go ahead, Andrew, play along with me.
I would like my staff to look at the issues that come across their desk. I would like them to be able to see things, like to evaluate everything that they're looking at, so they don't have as many errors when they come out. I feel like there's so many errors that are coming out through my staff, and they just need to take time to stop and think about these issues that they're seeing, you know, whatever comes across their desk.
All right, this is great. So Andrew's giving me a lot of information here, right? But I need to pull the string. I need to pull the thread to understand better what he's referring to. So all I want us to do right now is focus on his vision of the outcome, what he wants to see happen. We'll get into the root cause and we'll get into the issues around it later. But right now, I just need to understand what that outcome is. So what's a good follow-up question to get clarity on his vision for an outcome? So we just said they're making a lot of errors. What's
Ask for an example. What, can you give me an example of the kind of error they're making?
Go ahead, Andrew.
So they'll get financial reports, and they're responsible for putting these financial reports together, looking at this and putting together summaries for our leaders. And a lot of times they'll make very simple errors. They will take things across. They'll put revenues in expenses. Things will look all over the place, and they don't really do their due diligence to find out that these figures are correct.
Hey, now just with 2 questions, we have a lot more to go, but just with 2 questions, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Is this really a critical thinking issue?
No,
Is this even about critical thinking?
no.
Not right now, right? So when we're pulling this string, we want to dive in deeply into getting clarity about what his end vision is. So let me just share what that question category is. And we'll go to the next one. Come on, there we go. So this question category 1 is focused on the outcome. What is the outcome that Andrew wants to see happen? And why is that? Because he can call it critical thinking, he can call it quality control, he can call it a sunflower for all I care. What matters is that I start to really understand what he needs to have happen. Now, what have I not done? What do you notice I haven't done yet? What haven't I offered him?
A solution.
You got it. We don't go there yet. We're not
But
even.
you also haven't challenged him, which I think is really important as well to call out.
Yeah, I don't want to challenge him,
Channeling my
right?
inner Guy Wallace here. 'Cause he always says that don't challenge your stakeholder. Yeah.
That's right. There's no point to challenge him, right? I'm not going to tell him critical thinking. Do you even know what that means? Do you have a concept of what you obviously haven't taken any programs ever on critical thinking, or you wouldn't have asked me for that, right? We're not
Let's
going
see
to do
how
that
your
at
own
all.
critical thinking is, when I ask you all these questions.
Well, that
but
brings us, go ahead, Mirjam.
Oh, actually, it's clear. The manager needs to offer the solution themselves to me to be able to actually lean on the solution.
Maybe sometimes I want to lead the client, the stakeholder, away from a solution because I don't want them anchoring that solution. If they anchor a solution, then I have to negotiate away from it later. So if I can avoid a solution to begin with, I may do that. So Andrew, could you do me a favor in our next evolution of this role play? Would you say, hey, Matt, I just really want a workshop. Can you do a workshop for me?
Mhm.
And we'll demonstrate that piece.
Okay.
The category 2 now is after I really flesh out your vision. So we spend maybe 10, 15 minutes, if you're willing, to get a clear vision of the problem. And right now, let's pretend it's a lot of errors are getting done in your workflow. Right, there's a lot of problems in their data input, blah, blah, blah. Now, the second category of questions is about the criteria for success. So now, Andrew, I'm going to dive into this piece. So Andrew, once we really work on making sure that people aren't making the errors, how are we going to measure that they're doing this more effectively? what is the criteria for you to feel like we invested a good time in working with these folks?
My leadership just spends less time fixing the errors. They spend less time going back to the people and making sure that they are and telling them to correct the errors. That's ultimately because my leadership's time is precious. So I don't want them to have to spend as much time doing this as they should be. So that would be one measure of success.
So it's making sure that people are inputting things correctly the first time, and that you have faith in that, so you don't have to do cross-checking.
Correct.
Got it. Got it. Now, what kind of follow-up question do I want to make on that? Think about policies or procedures as a hint. Where might I want to take this next?
What tools do they currently have to input correctly?
I love that, Claire. Go ahead, Andrew. By the way, you can say blah, blah, blah if you don't know.
Sorry, I didn't hear what Claire was saying. Sorry. Can
Will you repeat it, Claire?
I asked what tools do the learners currently have to input the information correctly?
Well, we give them like an hour training on it. So, I mean, once we give them an hour of training and we tell them to go through one practice example, we just think, okay, you're good to go. And then we say, just have your coworkers check the report once you do it. So we kind of build that safeguard in already.
Hey, what did Andrew just do? Andrew just acted perfectly well. But what did he just avoid doing?
He didn't answer the question.
Of course he didn't. He didn't answer the question, and he just derailed us. And a less experienced me would have fallen for that and would have gone right down with him, right? But he didn't answer the question.
I have a follow-up one if I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, Andrew, how do you measure the mistakes that they are doing? Do you have any way of tracking them?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, we pretty much try to calculate how much our leadership is going back. If they're going back, we take some kind of an informal tally of like what they're doing. And if we find that our leadership is going back to them more often, and we might say in a week, we count how many times our leaderships are going back to talk to them. And we kind of take that tally and say, yep, that's how much time they're kind of spending on correcting these reports instead of doing what they need to be doing at the leadership level. So I'd say that, they'll go back and we'll take a tally during the week.
Okay, now this is an interesting thing. Going back and taking a tally doesn't feel very scientific, does it? What red flags are starting to pop up for you?
There are no measurements, nothing that's clear-cut, nothing that's quantified, no stats whatsoever, no list of what the errors actually are.
Uh-oh. So how's our critical thinking workshop going to look in the end at this rate?
Maybe Andrew should take it?
Yeah, right? So as we're going through and we're starting to figure this out, we're running into a lot of red flags. There's a lot of possible problems with the request that's coming in, and we need to keep digging in. Now, let's forward through this, and we find out from Andrew that criteria for success is we have fewer errors, fewer repeats. We can measure the amount of time the leadership and management have to spend redoing the work. We can find out that people are having to redo the work on their own less and less, and so forth. These are some of the metrics. Category number 3 is actually a trick category, because I find that when I ask people for criteria, we still don't get enough depth, enough quantitative discussion on what the metrics are. So this third category is really a subsequent probing of the second category.
Can I take over from Andrew for a bit?
Uh-oh, do I want that? I'm afraid of you.
I think stakeholders might say at this point, you know, if you keep digging, say, yeah, okay, Matt, this is all very nice in theory, but in reality, we just know that our people are making mistakes. I mean, we see it every day. We might not have proper reports, but we know. So I mean, I understand that ideally we would have specific metrics and we would need to do a better job. But believe me, these errors are there. And let's move on with the conversation, please, and go back to the workshop.
Mirjam, I believe you. I totally believe you. And I'm going to ask you to give me 15 minutes of time so that we do a best practice and make sure that we're validating that we're right. So we don't have to waste 3 days doing the wrong training for you. And if you just give me 15 more minutes, I promise we'll get it right the first time. Are you willing to invest 15 more minutes of your time with me so I can get it right for you?
Well, all right, if you insist.
By the way, if you say no, I have 10 outside external consultants that are more than willing to take your money and do what you want them to do. But then you'll be calling me anyway to fix it later. So what do you think? I probably am about to get fired for that response, depending on how senior she is. But what are we doing?
Well, for the sake of this session, I would say I'll give you the 15 minutes.
But in real life, she'd get me fired. But do we have the right to push back? Yeah, it's your job. Push back and do so politely, but don't let them push you around and tell you, or you're an order taker, in which case you're the lowest denominator of L&D professional. Don't repeat that I said that, but don't be the order taker. Push back, be the consultant that doesn't cost them anything, right? Help them. Okay. Questions? Those of you who are internal, how familiar is this conversation?
I think it's very familiar. I think we've all seen or experienced stakeholders that don't have enough time or also don't really want to dig deeper into some of these things as well. And I think this is where indeed some of these skills like stakeholder management are so important. You do have the right to push back. You have to do it in the right way. But I think it's important to also always focus on, hey, I'm trying to help you, and to make sure that we get the best for you. It's important that we go through this process because eventually I want to make sure you actually get the outcome that you're looking for as well. And that's usually how at least you try to get through to them as well. But I don't think anybody here in this virtual classroom has not experienced similar things as what you're hearing right now.
Yeah, I sometimes will give a stakeholder the example of a surgeon who doesn't take the time to make sure they're about to open up the right leg. Right? I'm going to amputate the left leg. Oops, I needed to amputate the left leg. Right? So we need to spend the time to make sure what we're doing is the right thing. And if we don't, we're in trouble. And so sometimes you have to give the right story to the stakeholder to invest in that time. Which then brings us to category number 4. If we understand the outcomes, and if we understand what the metrics and the criteria are, there's probably several deliverables embedded in that. And if we don't understand what the relative value is for each of those criteria, for each of those metrics, we can't make decisions about what to do fully, what to give up if we don't have time when logistics or other constraints rear their ugly heads. we need to understand what the value propositions are for each of the different metrics. So we can choose to focus on one and not another one if we have to make choices. And so the fourth category is understanding the worth of what it is for each of the deliverables you're going to bring to the table. If we're talking about metrics or criteria, I might say, Andrew or Mirjam, what is the relative value for each of those? How would you prioritize those? If I can only give you 3 of them, which would the 3 be? Right? This way I can make decisions later. Okay, questions about that? So these 4 question categories are how I like to start stakeholder management. Just the beginning. It's just the initial conversation that I want to have. But this helps me to work through a set of problems. Now, what do? Well, now we got to figure out if what the problem is that Andrew's sharing with me is actually a learning problem, or if it's something else, or maybe it's both. Maybe there's a whole bunch of organizational development issues that we're going to need to structurally align to, and then identify which part of that's learning, or maybe no problem exists at all. So now we have to go into a deeper analysis. Now we're going to have to do a deeper exploration of what the actual root cause is, where the issues fall. Now, there are all different types of gaps that we can explore, and we're going to get into this in weeks 3 and 4, but there's knowledge gaps and skill gaps, and these tend to align to learning, right? If I have a knowledge gap or I have a skill gap that we need to close, I probably have some form of a learning intervention to bring in. But what if it's an ability gap? Can anyone tell me the difference between an ability and a skill? What's the difference?
A skill is learned and an ability is more based on who you are, right?
An ability is more innate, right? In the old days, we called them talents, but it's politically incorrect nowadays. So, but an ability is more of the innate, you're born with it. But it's challenging because sometimes an ability might conflate with learned skills. And so we sometimes have a really hard time differentiating which is an ability, which is a skill. For example, charisma. Is charisma a skill or is it an ability?
It's not a skill.
Nope. And those of you who may come from the United States or are familiar with US history, we had a vice president named Al Gore who ran for president in the year 2000. Al Gore was famous or infamous for having no charisma. So what did he do? He hired a charisma coach and he ended up dancing the Macarena. Oh boy, was that horrible to watch. He went through training, coaching to get better at charisma. It didn't help. Charisma is not a skill that one can learn or get better at. It's pretty innate. And then there are little things we can do to get better at it, but you can only improve only so much, right? So certain things are more innate and it's not really a learning problem. What about attitudes? Is an attitude a training problem? Is it a learning problem? Send them to therapy. Get them a coach.
It's
Right.
innate, but it can be adjusted to a certain point.
Yeah, we might be able to do some kind of learning jolt to kind of realign attitudes, but you're starting probably from a positive place to begin with. If I have someone with a horrible attitude, this isn't going to be corrected through learning. This needs to be corrected through other interventions. Learning isn't one of them, right? What about logistics? How many times are we asked to build training courses for workflow process issues? Or people don't have enough time or resources, but we're asked to fix things for logistical problems. All right. So abilities, attitudes, logistics, those types of gaps need different types of interventions. If we have a knowledge or skill gap, well, we might be able to do something through learning. But are these independent of each other? Nope. So that's where we start to have to build complex interventions, right? We're not talking about the complex learning piece. We're talking about a complex intervention where we need to build in other types of facets to what we're going to build. So learning has either a skill gap closure or some kind of knowledge closure. But it's not about logistics or policy gaps or about closing ability or attitudinal gaps. But even a correctly closed gap is not necessarily the solution to the problem. So we need to make sure that what the problem is actually the problem and not just a problem. In other words, is the problem we're trying to solve for actually the real issue at hand? Or is the stakeholder elevating a problem that isn't really related? Is it a correlational problem? Is it something that has nothing to do with the real issue? Are we really uncovering the root cause? Are we really getting into it? And that's where we're going to get into things in our needs analysis. Are we really finding out what the right issue is at stake? So as you go through this, we're going to ask you to explore and gathering data. So what proof do we have that the problem is what it is, that the problem is the right problem for us to solve, and that problem has been fully identified in terms of knowledge gaps, skill gaps, ability gaps, attitudinal gaps, and logistic gaps. We're going to look through different observational techniques. So what are we able to see? What are we able to observe along with that data? And are we triangulating? Are we getting enough multiple perspectives to make sure that we're not just relying on Dawn or Mirjam or stakeholders' perspective? So we need multiple sources. We need independent sources. If Peter and Mirjam and Andrew are all on the same team and they all work for Dawn and Dawn is telling them what their thoughts should be, then if we ask Peter, Mirjam, and Andrew their opinion, we're probably going to get just Dawn's opinion regurgitated. So we need to have independent sources giving us the information. And we need to pull that string and we need to engage all different types of players. So not just our stakeholders now, but we need to talk to end users, SMEs, influencers, clients, customers, and so forth. And once we do, now we can go back to our stakeholder and we can start sharing what the actual problem is. And to do that, we have a tool that we're going to introduce to you later this week called the 4-step influence process. Now that we have a problem in hand, we need to get the stakeholder to believe us, agree with us, and then offer a solution. So what do? We get agreement on the problem first. We don't go with a solution. We start with the problem and make sure the stakeholder agrees that this is indeed the issue. Then and only then do we move toward figuring out what the solution is, how we're going to execute that solution, and so forth. So this model, this process is used in mediation, comes out of mediation as a way of negotiating how to move forward. And I find that this works extremely well. I cannot get people to move toward a solution, to agree to a solution, till we fully agree on what the problem is. And we need to make sure we align that problem at the appropriate level. So if we're dealing with mid-level managers, they have a different set of care-abouts than frontline managers, who have a different set of care-abouts than C staff, than independent contributors. These care-abouts are generic, But if you take this and map it to your organization, I bet you'll find similar types of issues that they think about on a daily basis. So C staff level folks, they tend to care about a certain level of strategy, board politics, competition. Their level of predictability is about functionality, revenue for the whole organization, and so forth. That's different than divisional leaders who tend
Hey,
to care
Matt.
about their silo. Yeah, Mirjam.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, it might be a good idea, but tell me if I'm wrong. So Dom just made a really great comment around that we need to not talk about, that we need to talk about the problem here, right? So not about opinions on solutions. So I thought it might be worth thinking about it from, you know, the slide that you have up now, from a problem perspective, and then how you frame, because that's actually the part that I think might need a bit of clarification. I don't know if it's me, but how do you frame your message if you're not focusing on the solution, right, but on the problem? That's what
Yeah, so let's actually take a real problem now. So now Andrew might be the only one who has seen this. So now I want to share with you and introduce you to Charles-Louis. So here is a real life scenario, okay? Let me get to it. I'm going to play this video, and I want you to identify where you think Charles-Louis is organizationally. Is he at the C staff? Is he at a senior leader staff but below? Is he a frontline supervisor or an independent contributor? Listen to what he says, watch the video, and then we'll debrief where he is around this problem, okay? Maybe.
Hi Matt, how's it going? It's been a while, and I was wondering, would you come over and have an activity for our team, our leadership team? I think it would be great if you did a fun team building activity to have some bonding with the colleagues. You know, we've been in this lockdown situation for a while, and people don't come to the office again, so let's give them a good reason to come back.
Okay, so I'm going to just pause it right there. First of all, he's an executive vice president, but that doesn't mean much. So, because the title is a title. So where do you think he is based on the way he's talking? Do you think he's at a more senior level or a more junior level of leadership? Claire and Andrew say junior. I would kind of say, yeah, I agree with Marcia. He's junior to middle level. If he hasn't already said it, he's got about 80 people reporting into him. So he's not a supervisor, but he does seem pretty inexperienced, right? All right. Now, from a problem standpoint, what do you think he cares about? If he's at that mid-level on that chart, what do you think he cares about? What are his care abouts? Team cohesion. He doesn't care about budget. He has budget. Team morale, right? So something is going on where someone got into his ear about well-being, or someone got into him about motivation or something like this, right? So team morale. So why would a mid-level manager care about team morale? Why do you think this is relating to him? He heard about it on his 360. That's great, Scott. What do you think? He's coming about this.
It could be a culture survey that, and his leadership has tasked him with turning that around. It could be that people are pushing back coming into the office. And so he's been asked to find a solution for that, because he's right in the middle. He's right at that compression point between leadership expectations and the pushback from teams and individuals.
Yeah, there's something that's causing friction, and he's got to pull people together for a group meeting. So he might as well use this as a topic, right? So that's our frame of reference. That's all we know. We don't know anything else right now until we learn a little bit more. So we ask about performance.
Oh, on the performance side, we are hitting our numbers all the time. They're doing a great job.
Wait, what? They're doing well? So then why the hell are we talking about this? He has they're hitting their numbers, they're doing well, but he wants to do a team building workshop. That doesn't make sense, does it?
Really happy of my team. By the way, I didn't tell you, but we went from 60 people to 80 over the last 12 months, which is a great performance, knowing about lockdown, knowing that people leave and so on. And so they hit the numbers consistently all the time, and we're very happy with them.
So we have no performance problem. So our next question and thinking is, do we have a morale problem? He seems to imply we do, right?
So morale, this is a tough one. I'm not sure. I'm actually worried that they might leave, because what I notice is people don't come to the office anymore. Every excuse they take, oh, I'm going to work from home today because I have whatever. So sometimes they say, yeah, I have this thing, so I can't come to the office. So I don't know if that's related to morale, but there's one thing I'm fearing is that maybe people might leave. And this is why I really want to have a fun and engaging workshop or team building activity, so that they can bond and have like their relationships.
So Claire's linking in, right? We might have a retention problem. He's got some flight risks, right? Okay, so that's interesting.
Yep, so we are hitting our goals, but they're not that easy to achieve. So yeah, it's a kind of a struggle, because I noticed that they're working really, really hard. Some it's they work over weekends and so on, and send stuff even on Sunday evening, and so it's like a consistent thing. I noticed that they work.
All right. You guys getting the idea? Here's your homework. Your homework is twofold. Go into the Blinkit and watch this whole video and tell us what you think the problem is and how you ask questions of Charlotte. What questions do you want to know? Put it right into the Blinkit, put it into the comments. Dive into this scenario and start to figure out where he's at and what else you need to know. Use your 4 questions to pull that string and upload what you want to follow up with. That's homework number 1. Homework number 2, and these will be posted in the Blinkit for you at the end of today. Homework number 2 is, what are some of the real life scenarios you might want to start working on? Bring to our next session, our next live session, your real life problem. What are you going to want to work on? What are you going to want to do? How can we make this real for you? Okay, so that's your homework. And then if you haven't done the asynchronous stuff, catch up on it. One last thing, and I know we're a minute over. Proctor and Megan, you guys are in Australia. I think Megan may not even be here. But given that it's middle of the night for you, I won't promise Mirjam's time, but I will promise my time. And then if Mirjam's able to, we'll do it together. But I'm happy to meet with our Australian contingent, so it's not the middle of the night for you. Just send me an email and we'll schedule something. And I'll repeat the session, or we'll work on your problems together. But for any of the folks where this time is middle of the night, let me know and we'll make it work, okay? Because I don't want poor Proctor having to get up at, what is it, Proctor, 2 a.m. for you now?
No, it's midnight at the moment.
Oh, it's early. So I want to make sure that Proctor and Megan and our other friends in Australia and China and Japan don't have to do that. So just let me know and we'll accommodate you on that, okay? Just let me know times that work for you and we'll make it happen, okay? Any questions? All right, our next live session is sometime in the future. I forgot when it is. Mirjam's pointing to the
I
sky.
think it's later this week.
I think it's Friday.
Yeah, 1 second, I'm looking at that calendar. It is, I think it's next Monday, actually.
It might be next
Yeah,
Monday.
it's next Monday. Yeah, next Monday, same time.
So in the meantime, I will get all these new pieces of content uploaded into Blinkit by tomorrow morning, my time at the latest. We'll turn all of that on, and your job is to go back and catch up and come back to us with a problem. So how's this going? Is this intriguing? Are we going down the right path? Okay. All right. Well, I will hang out if people have any questions, and I'm going to stop the recording now.
Thanks.